Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is the memoirist Harrison Scott Key. Key has two earlier books of memoir, The World's Largest Man and Congratulations, Who Are You Again? His new book is How to Stay Married, the most insane love story ever told. I spoke with Harrison Key in Studio UA in the Digital Media Center on the campus of the University of Alabama. Harrison, it's nice to see you again. We became acquainted just for a couple of days at Joan Reeves' very fine gathering up in Rainsville, Alabama, at the Northeast Alabama Community College annual literary meet. She does a wonderful job.
That was
there.
So much fun. I had so much fun at that event.
There's this little college on Sand Mountain, and once a year they have a really extraordinary literary festival. It's fun.
It's very cool that she does that too. That it takes just one person to make something like that happen. But it was awesome, and it was a great interview that you did on stage.
Well, we did talk, but we didn't record anything.
That's right, thankfully.
And I can't remember anything that we said, so it doesn't matter.
I cussed the whole time. It was just cussing.
Good to get it out of your system.
Yeah.
But now we're here to do some of what we did there, except that at that time there were two books, and now there is a new book.
That's right.
But we have not talked on camera about any of your books, and I'd like to go back and do a little catching up for the viewer. Sure. You were raised in Mississippi by a man, the world's largest man.
The world's largest man. That's right.
That childhood, a lot of readers reading that first memoir about your childhood and your relationship to your father, a lot of readers would really blink. They would say, that was hard.
Yeah. Or did that really happen?
Oh, I believed it. I believed it all right. But characterize that. I mean, your father was tough, big, strong. Was he mean?
He was a little bit of everything. He was funny. He was not an intellectual. The only book he ever read was a bass fishing magazine that we got every week or every month. He was a little bit of everything. I mean, that title came to me at the very last moment as I was finishing the book. And he was a big man. I mean, he was built like a great big piece of granite. And but then I realized that, in a way, everybody's dad is the largest man in the world, either metaphorically or, or physically. But what's funny is, most people are surprised to learn this. I was taller than my father, and he was always much bigger than me and much stronger than me. But I remember doing interviews. I did an interview with NPR, and their first question was, how big was your dad? And I had to let them down and explain that I was actually taller than my dad. But he was better than me at everything that I was supposed to be good at as a young boy growing up in the rural South. He was a great fisherman, a great sportsman. He was a football coach, and he could cut a cord of wood in an hour and a half. And I was bad at all of that. And so a lot of that book was about what it was like I was shocked that this man was my father. I was sure that I had been adopted or, picked up by the roadside when I was little. And so a lot of that book was an investigation into how could I be related to this man? And then I find out as I get older that I'm a lot more like him than I knew at the time.
One scene, now we can't dwell on very long, but there's a scene in there where you become a football star for a day.
Yes.
Because somehow you get into a game with a bunch of kids who are littler?
I was 14. I was a ninth grader, and these players were 10 and 11 years old. Now, it was Mississippi, so I wasn't much bigger than these kids. I mean, these were some corn-fed little boys. But it was a championship game, and two of the players were sick and they couldn't come, and so my dad was going to have to forfeit the game. And I had long since I quit football the year before, much to his dismay. Yeah. He was so upset that I didn't want to play football. I mean, and also that I was bigger than he had been at that age. And he had been recruited to go to Ole Miss and play for Coach Vaught. I mean, he had this whole life that he was about to have. And then I came along and I didn't like any of this. So I had quit football. And we had kind of had a falling out. And then he came into my room one evening and he asked me if I would go to the game with him, this championship game. And I thought this was like an olive branch. He was sort of saying, it's okay that you quit football. I still want to spend time with you and I want you to come to this game with me. And when and he told me to bring my cleats. And I thought that he meant like for somebody else. I had these old cleats I hadn't worn in a year. And I thought he was going to let somebody else wear them. And on the way to the game, he told me I was going to be playing fullback. And I didn't know what to do, man. I mean, he was my father and I wanted to respect his wishes, but I also couldn't believe this was happening. And so, yeah, I played in that game.
And you triumphed.
The final score was 63-0, and every touchdown was mine. He had never been as proud of me as he was in that moment. It was, you don't usually think of cheating as a happy father-son story, but that was absolutely like a great moment for us.
I have heard you speak of this, and I think I've read some reference. This might be a little movie, this particular day in your life.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you're working on that.
So I've written a screenplay.
Yeah,
I wrote a whole screenplay adapted just from that chapter. A little other parts of the book too, and it is so good. Like a lot of it's fictionalized because it's a screenplay, so you have to sort of make things work, make the time work, and all that. But it's being shopped around, as they say, of every other screenplay in the world. So we'll see.
Well, it's absurd, which is great step one.
Yes.
That the reluctant 14-year-old runs amok among the eager 11-year-olds.
Oh, I got knocked on my butt the first few plays because they were kids and I was in the ninth grade. You know, the difference between like sixth grade and ninth grade is a lot when you're that age. And I just thought, well, I'll just play just so they don't have to forfeit, but I won't like hurt anybody. There were a couple of dudes that were just as big as I was. Sure. And then the first couple of snaps, I got knocked on my butt, and I was like, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, I'm going to have to like fight for my life, that I'm not, totally humiliated on this field.
Well, when that movie comes out, I will watch because I think it's got a real wonderful premise.
It's a great story.
The book was a great success, sold well, and it is the book that won the Thurber Prize, yes?
Yeah.
And which puts you on the road.
Yes.
And you've been on the road again with this third book. Mm-hmm. You have a lot to say about the fairly recent. I mean, Hemingway never went on a book tour. Thomas Wolfe never went on a book tour. But you have been on marathon tours and written about it. Your second book, congratulations, Who Are You Again?
Yep.
Is largely about the publicizing of the first book.
Yeah.
What about the book tour?
It is, so I didn't know. I mean, when I wrote this first book, I knew that I would probably do some book events. I actually think I enjoy reading my work aloud as much as I enjoy writing. And that goes back to my background as I'd been an actor for a little while and I did stand-up. And also just grew up in the South, going to church. I preached my first sermon when I was in high school. So you were expected to stand up and, recite from the King James or lead a prayer. So public speaking was very much a part of my life. And I was excited about that. But when I hit the road, there was a lot that I was not expecting to happen. Originally, I was just going to write a short essay about book touring because I just thought it'd be a funny little travel story. And, when I hit the road, I think I did maybe 30 events that first summer, which is a lot.
That's a lot.
Most book tours are 3 to 5 events. You go, and what I say in the second book is mostly you go to the towns where you used to live or where you, excuse me, or where your mom knows a lot of people, because your mom is your real publicist. At least my mom is. And when I hit the road, I started experiencing this whole new level of existence, where I was I was a bit of a celebrity that summer, because I'd been written about in the Times, and National Public Radio did a few spots about me. Every big paper in the South wrote about me, magazines, and I was getting recognized in airports, I was not expecting that at all. I would be eating a restaurant in some small town, and people would be taking photos of me. It was really strange. And so I started writing about that. But the weirdest part is the book is a memoir. Mostly what I write is memoir. And at all these events, people were coming out of the woodwork to tell me their angle on the stories I had written about, or that they were related to me. Or, I mean, my father's first wife, who I tell a story about my father's first wife in that book. He got married when he was 18. I think she was 15. And this was, back in the late 50s in Mississippi, so that wasn't odd, a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old.
1950s.
Yes,
Yep.
Although it could have been the 1850s. And so I was at a book event in Memphis, and I was telling this really funny story about who my mom described as the hussy, my father's first wife. And then I'm at the signing table, and everybody's sliding books over, and this woman slides a wedding photo, and I recognize it's my dad, but he's like 18 years old in the photo. And I went, "Oh my goodness, who's this?" And she goes, "That's me, I'm the hussy." And something like that happened everywhere I went. And I just knew I had to write about this, and sort of how it reconceptualized my view of writing and career and calling and all of that.
Oh. Well, that second book, which is about, in a sense, book tour and being on the road with the first book,
right,
kept you away from home a lot.
Yes.
The other thing that you do that kept you away from home a lot is you like you're not alone in this, but you like to write not at home. You like to go somewhere, cafes, coffee houses, I don't know where else. Do you go to other quiet places, libraries? What?
I've written everywhere: libraries, airports, Waffle Houses.
But not home.
I write at home now. I do.
We'll get to that.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But why? What is it, when you got in that habit, why did you develop the habit of needing to be in a Starbucks or whatever for writing?
So I grew up way out in the country, and so where you have this thing called going to town, like you go to town to get groceries, you go to town to see a picture at the picture show, and you go to town and go to church, all that. And so when I got to college, so I started studying at the Waffle House in high school. I realized when I got my driver's license, because it was a way to see people. It was a way to interact with others or be in this. I mean, I loved community. I loved being around other people. And growing up where I grew up, unless you were at church or a baseball game, you really weren't around other people, around a lot of animals, but not people. And so when I got to college, I just couldn't, even though I could have gone to the library or studied in my dorm room, I wanted to get out. I think part of that also comes from, I don't know if this is a gendered thing or not, but this idea of always growing up where men wake up and they leave and they go somewhere and they do something and then they come home.
Sure.
And I think I sort of inherited that desire to writing is work if you get up and you go somewhere to do it.
Oh, you're going to your job.
Yeah, going to a job.
Yeah.
And you do get kicked out of places if you linger too long and don't buy anything. I mean, I would always buy coffee. I've been kicked out of Waffle Houses. They will only kick you out on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day, which are the two of the busiest days at Waffle House. I never knew that. I would never gone to Waffle House on a holiday, but I was kicked out of a Waffle House for not ordering anything. But I just love the sounds of making the coffee and all of that. I love it.
Well, I have to say, this is the opposite of what I had assumed. I assumed you went to these places to enjoy a very, very quiet and be alone time. And it turns out that you really are interested in being in a place where there are other people,
Yeah.
which is not what I
Yes.
thought.
No, well, it also provides some respite. If you're like lost in your own head while you're writing, then your friend comes in and they can sit down across the table from you.
2 books of memoir, and then you suggested, I read this somewhere, suggested to your agent or your editor this 3rd book, and she said, "Oh no, not another memoir."
Yeah, she said, "Dear God, are you serious?"
Yeah, well, you were, and you are, and it's done. And the elapsed time may not be evident at first, but this book covers a period of about 5 years,
Yeah.
from about 2017 till about almost the present,
Yeah.
last year, 22, say. And this book is about your dealing with a revelation, in a way, a catastrophe. One day, you and your wife were speaking, and she said,
I want a divorce because I'm in love with somebody else. I said, who? She said, our neighbor. He was no longer our neighbor, thankfully, at the time. So that completely rocked me, as you would imagine.
"Yeah." Well, there are several strands that repeat. One of them, I find this very difficult to talk about, as you surely have found it difficult to talk about. You do an exquisite job of describing your pain.
Thank you.
It's almost like not a joke. I mean, you do. You're eloquent on how bad you felt.
Yeah. It's, sometimes I think I don't really know how I feel until I articulate that, whether it's in therapy or in a letter to somebody or in a story. And I think that's true I think that's one of the reasons I write nonfiction. I don't really know how I feel until I say it. And that always started with just storytelling, just sitting on porches or sitting at a Waffle House and telling a story. And so, the feeling of my wife having an affair with this guy who had been my friend and it happening right under my nose, the feelings are so multitudinous.
Yeah.
You feel rage, you feel despair, you feel shock, confusion. You also strangely feel, what's the word? You feel superior too, like in a way, because you're like, well, I'm a pretty bad person, but at least I've never done that. Like, it's very strange, all the feelings that you feel. There's also, I'll say this, there's a kind of weird elation in finding out terrible things about yourself or your family or your marriage. And it's hard to articulate exactly how, but sort of like you've had suspicions, and this goes to all of my books, like suspicions about my father, my family, or about my wife. Like you've thought something's not right here, and I don't know what it is. And then all of a sudden when you find out the truth, there's a kind of elation with that because you're like, oh, now I know. And it's terrible. It's a terrible thing to know, but I was elated. And so parsing all that when you feel it is really very difficult if you're just sitting there driving down the road thinking about it. But writing about it allows you to do that.
So it really, all right, this is something I'd thought about dealing with a little bit later, but now is fine. On the one hand, this is therapeutic for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, it has to be. On the other hand, do you think of this book as in some way helpful to others?
Oh yeah, definitely.
In what? How? For whom and how?
Well, I mean, every story I write is kind of a mystery novel. And the mystery is, there's always a question. How can I be related to this man? What is it like to finally achieve the dream you have long sought to achieve? What is it like to find out that your wife, who is funnier, nicer, more attractive than I am, more people like my wife than me, everybody wants to be her friend. What is it like to find out that this person, I mean, she's always been the good cop in our marriage, and I'm the bad cop.
And you have 3 daughters.
We have 3 daughters. So how is it that this person can do this? who killed, and so in this book, this is really like not just a mystery, but it's sort of like a horror story too. I mean, the even the cover kind of, intimates that. But at the beginning, like a great mystery, at the beginning of the book, something dies, a person dies, not a person in this case, but our marriage. And so the mystery is, who killed this thing? Is it really dead?
Okay.
And what's my responsibility in that?
At that point, at that chronological moment, at that emotional moment, there are 2 or 3 options available. One of them, having grown up in rural Mississippi with guns, is violence.
Yeah, rage. The Old Testament option.
You could kill everybody,
Sure, or some of them.
and then yourself.
Maybe, yeah, people
But
do
you
that.
didn't.
I didn't do that.
All right. You consulted. You were at that point a member of a conventional mainstream church,
Yeah.
and you sought counsel.
Yes.
What did you get as advice from the mainstream church?
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, he was very sad for my family and me, and offered great words of encouragement. But he suggested, and after a conversation, suggested excommunication or judgment. In other words, we can shame your wife back into your marriage and get her to behave. I mean, that was essentially what he was saying, which is the position of a lot of people, not just Christians or religious folks, but
This is 10 Commandments stuff.
yes, like what she's doing is wrong.
Right.
So to get her to do the right thing, we can use the whip, the stick of threatening her to excommunicate her and eject her from this community. And I get it. I get how maybe that would have worked 500 years ago, when not to be allowed to be in your church would have really meant exile from your entire town and your world. But that is not what I wanted to do. I didn't feel that was the right option.
You chose a very, very difficult path, which was trying to understand what happened and achieving forgiveness.
Yeah.
One of the things that popped up for me was, in order for you, this is how I understood it. You can tell me if I get it sort of right. In order to forgive her properly, you had to figure out that part of it was your fault.
Yes.
So you have to take some of the guilt in order that it's not a black and white situation
Yeah.
where you're the saint and she's the sinner and you forgive her.
Yes.
And that part that you took to yourself was what?
The responsibility, you mean?
Well, what part of all this mess was your fault?
Yeah. So one of my good friends, who's also a counselor, he said, in a situation like this, if the marriage is if it's gonna work out, if the partners are gonna be reconciled, then both of them have to own their part in it. Now, he wasn't saying that the affair was my fault.
And you had not had affairs. That's important.
Yes, I had not
know.
had an affair. Many opportunities. Sorry, ladies, but I'd never done that. But what he was saying was, maybe look in the mirror and see how you made your marriage a place that somebody might not want to be. Now, there are a lot of reasons for people to have affairs, but at the end of the day, an affair is always the symptom of a broken marriage, not the other way around. And so I looked in the mirror and had to come to terms with, in a way, a lot of what I had been processing in the first 2 books. So I would say I don't think I would still be married. I don't think this would be the title of this book if I had not written those first 2 books. Because in those first 2 books, I had to start processing how I was like and unlike my racist, misogynist, anti-intellectual father, whom I loved very much and who loved me. I had to come to terms with sort of the South, what I had inherited from the South that I loved and didn't love. And then I had to come to terms with my sort of workaholism, my ambition.
Yeah. You wrote day and night.
And so I had already processed a lot. And in fact, my wife's confession of the affair was precipitated by, a few days earlier, I had come to her and said, I'm so thankful that I've been able to write these books and process a lot of stuff that was beguiling me or bedeviling me maybe
Yeah,
for a
sure,
long
sure.
time. And I said, I've been so focused on myself. I've been so focused on my career and on money. And so I confessed all this to her, and I said, I'm so sorry. And I want to thank you for like sticking with me through all this. And then 3 days later is when she told me she hadn't stuck with me.
Part of what you come to learn is, we don't have a lot of time, but you came to a fresh understanding of the psychological traumas that she had been in.
Yeah.
But you had always known that her father deserted her mother. You'd always known that her mother died of cancer, very miserably,
Like 10 days before our wedding.
10 days before your wedding. But those biographical events became very important in your processing of why she did what she did.
Yeah. My wife was not a great communicator. She was pretty introverted, kept her cards very close to the chest all her life. And so I knew these things had happened to her, that she had a lot of childhood trauma. They had been homeless for a while. Her father, who was an ordained minister here in Alabama, had an affair and left their family. I knew that these things had happened, but didn't realize how much they had affected my wife. And this happened right before we got married, all of this. And so she had no parents at our wedding. I mean, her father, who was a deadbeat, wasn't there, and her mother had just passed away. In fact, we had the funeral in the same church where we had the wedding 10 days before.
This sort of, in a sense, reemerged over time, these traumas. Well, the title says How to Stay Married. So there's a spoiler there.
Yeah.
That after several rounds of horror, you and she are together. Your children are as you were 16.
They're 12, 14, and 17.
12, 14, and 17.
3 girls.
And that's important. That was surely a enormous motivating factor in making this thing work.
Yeah.
But you are now a married couple.
We're still married, yes.
I would not jump out there and say happily married couple, but you're going to be. That's the point, right?
Yeah, the book has I won't say a happy ending, even though it's relatively happy.
Sure.
It has a hopeful ending.
Yes.
But not a Hollywood ending.
Well, we're actually suddenly out of time, but I know that people watching and people who are going to read this book, we all wish you the best.
Well, thank you. Thanks. We'll take all the good wishes that you have to offer.
It's amazingly candid. It must have been painful to write, and thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.